Welcome to the Stewards Enquiry on the Winners' Enclosure. Over the course of the next 6 weeks, we're going to be focusing on all things Cheltenham Festival. We'll be looking ahead to races, reviewing races and analysing on each individual race, obviously with the intent of trying to provide you with a few winners. Well, I'm pleased to say I'm joined by Chris Dixon. And Chris, great to have you with us. It's exciting times ahead.
Very much so. It's that time of year now, isn't it, where the focus really does start to switch to Cheltenham. It seems for jump racing fans that sometimes to the detriment of the rest of the season on occasions, that the talk is about Cheltenham from such an early stage. But we are starting to get now to the final prep runs for a lot of these horses. There's horses that we'll be discussing that will now head straight to the festival with a nice time frame from their most recent start to the Cheltenham Festival. And obviously after the Dublin Racing Festival over the course of the weekend, we've seen a lot of the key performers now. We know what they've got to offer, and it's just trying to form an opinion ahead of Cheltenham. The one thing that you've got to bear in mind with the anti-post betting, I think, Emma, is that we really don't know what the ground is going to be. It was always an assumption that you would get decent ground come Cheltenham in March, but two of the last three festivals, that hasn't been the case, and it's wetter than it's ever been in the last few weeks. So it's impossible to know what ground we're going to be dealing with, but then you can find plenty of horses that have got form on both sorts of surface.
Well, the obvious starting point is to reflect on the weekend, because there were some pretty monster performances by some special horses, weren't there?
There were, most of them trained by Willie Mullins, who's just got a fantastic stable of talent at his disposal at the moment. He hasn't just got one horse for some of these races. He's got a couple, in occasions he's got three horses. And when it comes to the graded races, I think it is going to be very much an Irish domination. They seem to have the strength in depth. Paul Nicholls has a good few to aim at it. And obviously with the likes of Shishkin, then Nicky Henderson has got shouts as well. But it is going to be the Irish that are the ones to beat, I think. And Willie Mullins, with the weekend that he had at the Dublin Racing Festival, put out some sparkling performance, didn't he?
Well, let's start with Monkfish, because he was phenomenal. He's so natural, isn't he?
Yeah, may as well start with the best of them, I suppose, Emma. He really does look a star performer, does Monkfish. I mean, how could you not be impressed, really? I think the two things that impressed me most were his jumping, which is just so slick and swift. He's a horse that obviously stays well. We saw that at the Cheltenham Festival last year. He's a staying chaser, but he's very, very quick from one side of a fence to the other. He doesn't spend much time in the air, and that is obviously helping him. But then the raw pace that he's got, when he was just pushed clear yesterday for little more than a small amount of persuasion, the response is immediate and swift, and he disposed of some good horses in emphatic fashion. He looks a real superstar.
He gets in close as well. If he does, he's so athletic that his shoulders, he can lift them up. He bends his back, and he's just faultless, really, in what you see. I mean, it's going to be difficult for something to beat him, isn't it?
You would think so. I mean, you know, something could come out the woodwork, I suppose, and Cheltenham will be a different type of test over fences to what he's had before. But he's got that festival form in the book from last year, and it's pretty difficult to pick holes in him, to be honest, the way that he's been going. And he's going to be targeted at a race that the stable have got a good record in as well. So you sort of look at all of those factors, and he just looks like a horse that is going to be very difficult to beat come the festival.
I was just going to say to you, if you had a runner in the race and you were trying to set out about beating him, is there a way, do you think?
I'd probably duck him and go elsewhere. Although having said that, you're going to then be taking on Enguilen in the shorter distance race, and then you're going to have an Ergamine or Shishkin. I think that the point is really that there is real depth in the novice chase division this time around. I think if you've got a really good novice chaser this year, you're kind of half gutted that in each division there is a potential star, and unless you've got one of those stars, it could be quite difficult. But you know, things can happen. But the one thing with Monkfish really is he seems very straightforward. You can put him anywhere in a race. He's done it in different ways, hasn't he? So I don't know whether you could actually find a plan to try and get him beaten.
What about Chacun Pour Soi? Because he was also very, very impressive, landing back-to-back wins in the Dublin Chase.
Yeah, he was. He was very good. And I think the thing that you've got to like about Chacun Pour Soi this year, who I thought going into last year's festival, based on his win in this race last year, I thought he was heading into the festival as a horse that had the best 2 mile form in the book. But then on the morning of the race, he was out. And fragility has been his problem, hasn't it? That's been his Achilles heel in his career to this point. But this year, we've seen him 3 times. We've seen him regular. There's not been big gaps between his runs, and he's holding his form at a very high level, a level that the other 2 mile chasers aren't hitting so far this year. So again, if he just gets there in one piece, and the way that this season has gone, you've got to think that they're having a much more straightforward passage with him, then he's another one that is going to be hard to beat. And like you, couldn't help but be impressed by the way he jumped, travelled and put the race away at the weekend.
He also looks a lot more versatile now, doesn't he? You know, it once looked like he was a bit one-dimensional, but that's not the case. He's matured and relaxed.
He has, and he's going to want to have done. He's 9 years of age now, but he hasn't had a massive amount of racing behind him because of the fragility issues that they've had. And as you say, he's relaxing these races. He tends to take a lead, doesn't he? Sit just behind whatever's setting the pace, and he steadily jumps his way into contention. He stays very well, which is no bad thing, and he's got that cruising speed. So again, he's going to be a difficult horse to beat. Obviously, if some of the others come back to their best form in that division, then he's going to need to be at the peak of his powers. But if, as it stands on this year's form, if he can match what he's been doing, he's going to be good enough.
I love what Paul said about him afterwards. What's rare is beautiful. I mean, it kind of sums it up, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, it does, and he is he's right up there. You know, even if some of the others do bounce right back to where they've been, they might well struggle to deal with him. I think the other thing with Chacun is we maybe don't quite know how good he is yet. There could be a little bit more in the locker, and maybe the festival will push him to show that little bit more. It was a bit disappointing at the weekend that Min made that mistake. He was his main rival, seemingly on paper, going into the race, and he was quite swiftly pulled up after that error that he made. So we didn't get to see him take on Chacun further into the race, but I don't think the result would have been any different.
Can you see anything beating him at the festival? It's another odds-on favourite, likely.
Yeah, not really. There isn't enough depth there, and as I said, the dangers that he's got haven't sparkled, have they, so far this season? You know, you look at Defi de Soy, he's been a disappointment so far this season. Altior has a question mark against him. So you're looking at those obvious dangers to him, the other big guns going into the season, and looking at them and thinking, well, they're not at the level that Chacun's at. They're not at the top of their game. He is, and he might still have more to come.
And what did you make of Energumene? Because he was also very impressive in the Irish Arkle.
He was, wasn't he? He was brilliant. He's now 3 from 3 over fences. And again, he looks a real top notcher. I was going into this jump season thinking, well, so long as Shishkin is an assured jumper, and he looked like he was immediately when he was sent over fences, then he's going to be a very tough horse to beat in the Arkle. And that narrative for me hasn't really changed, but I think there was a bit of a spanner in the works over the weekend with Energumene and his performance in the Irish Arkle, because again, the way that he jumped, the way that he travelled was extremely impressive. He has so far over fences, and for a lot of his hurdles career, been a horse that does just go on and make the running. Now, I don't think that they'll necessarily have to do that, but when you think about the Arkle, he's going to be taken on in the early stages of a race, isn't he? You would think with All Mankind, who is a proper tearaway. So they are going to have to take a lead. One thing that he has got in his favour, Energumene, that a lot of Arkle winners in recent times have got, is winning form over a longer trip than 2 miles. Apart from the absolute superstar 2 mile chasers that have come out of the Arkle, a lot of them have been horses that stayed really well, and they had winning form over 2.5 miles. And that is something that Energumene has got if you're looking towards that as a pointer for the Arkle.
So which way are you heading at the moment, Ergamine or Shishkin?
Shishkin, still, just. But it's made life tougher. I think that is going to be a fantastic race, and that's a clash where there's not going to be any avoiding each other. They'll go at it. The way that the race develops will be fascinating. Shishkin will be sat in behind them. He'll look to come on and pick them off, I would think. Energumene likely to be played earlier, but All Mankind, who we're likely to see at the weekend, is going to be a spanner in the works. For what it's worth, he's not a horse that I'll fancy in an Arkle, All Mankind, but I still think that he'll have a significant part to play in it. So the weekend made it interesting, but I'd still lean towards Shishkin for all that I was massively impressed by Energumene.
And what about the bumper at Navan at the weekend where we saw Kilcruit? He looked awesome, didn't he?
Yeah, he looked very, very good, did Kilcruit at Leopardstown. He'd won at Navan the time before that. The race that he won, the Grade 2 at Leopardstown, it's got a fantastic roll of honour. Just have a look at the previous winners of this. Blackbow, who went on to be fifth in a champion bumper, Envoylen, who won the champion bumper, and Appreciate It, who was second in a champion bumper. And you watch that back, you'd have been impressed by him as any of those on the day that they won it. He was tremendous. I mean, absolutely powered through the race. They'd gone a decent gallop and they weren't exactly finishing off quickly, but he just coasted clear of them with any amount in hand, and he looks a real star performer in the making.
He does. Willie Mullins and Gordon Elliott have dominated the bumper in the last 4 years. I think they're 2 apiece, and the Irish have won it 21 out of 27, 29 runnings. So he is going to be quite a short price, and he looks the obvious Mullins first string. But we've seen before, it's sometimes the second, third or fourth that can spring a surprise.
Absolutely. Well, look at when Blackbow ran in it. He was, I think, probably about the most fancied one. The Mullins team will often throw a few darts at the race, won't they? And it's not always the one that you expect. But you would have to think that Kilcruit is going to go into Cheltenham now as their leading bumper contender. He's a short enough price, I think. But the depth in the bumper division in this country isn't that strong, I don't think. So I would expect it to be Ireland again.
What about Quilixios, who will now head to the Triumph? You couldn't really fault his performance at the weekend?
No, I don't think you could. He won a small field Grade 1, but he won it in a quicker time than Appreciate It won his Novice Hurdle, the Grade 1 on the card. So from that point of view, he ticks a box. He settled in mid-pack. He travelled nicely. He jumped pretty well. A couple of slightly novice-y jumps late on, but nothing that you'd worry about massively, I don't think. And talking about domination of the Irish in the bumper in recent years, well, domination this season in the juvenile hurdle division from Gordon Elliott, he seems to have all of them lined up. And it's just a case of how he shuffles his pack, really, as to what happens. But Quilixios, who runs in the colours of the Cheveley Park Stud, long-time flat owners, but they've got some team of jumpers at the minute from a select enough number. And he is now a Grade 1 winner that has to go to the Triumph Hurdle with a good chance. Unlike the other horses that Gordon Elliott has got, he's got those in novice hurdles as options. Quilixios isn't a novice because he won a 3-year-old hurdle in France. And so the Triumph is nailed on, you would think, to be his target.
Okay, well, let's concentrate on some of the novices. We'll start with the Supreme and Appreciate It. Another Willie Mullins hot pot is quite short in the betting here. What did you make of him at the weekend?
I wouldn't want to knock him in any way, Emma, but he's just a horse that doesn't wow me. And that's probably a little bit harsh for a horse that's got his record, second in a champion bumper and 3 wins over hurdles, winning them all fairly comfortably. I think what he is a horse that stays very well. I think further on in his career, he's not going to be a 2-miler. My worry with him in a way would be if you had decent ground on the first day of the festival, which is probably unlikely because they're not going to want to. It's even on a good ground year, it's slightly slower on the opening race and the opening day of the meeting because they'll have put some water on. Hard to envisage water in Haffron at this stage, but if it was quickish ground, that would be my worry because I think that there might be some faster horses in the race than him. He's a bit like a Champagne Fever kind of horse in that he responds very, very well off the bridle. He's one of those that you wouldn't give up on him if at the bottom of the hill he's shoved along and under a little bit of pressure. I'm sure he'll come home very strong. So been impressed with him, but not wowed by him. And he is fairly short at the top of the betting.
He wasn't quite as breathtaking as he was at Christmas, but as you say, he delivers and he's getting the job done.
Yeah, Absolutely, and he's a dual Grade 1 winner now in a top stable, so you can't really get negative on him, can you? It's just a point of view of the price, really. You know, I think I looked last night and he was sort of 7-4. Am I getting excited about 7-4? Not really. I think you can find a horse with a better chance at that price. The thing in his favour, I don't know what you think, but it's fairly thin on the ground behind him, isn't it? There's not loads of depth to the race.
No, where do you start? I mean, obviously Harry Fry's Metier is a good starting point.
Yeah,
have you liked what he's done so far?
Yeah, sort of going into Sandown and the Tolworth, I was looking at him and thinking, well, he'll need to win this to have a chance in at the festival, because it didn't look a brilliant Tolworth, but the clock tells you that it was a pretty good performance. It stacked up well to other races on the card. So while I think looking at the horses that he beat, I wouldn't be getting carried away. You look at the time and think, well, he's obviously a talented horse that's going to go there with a chance. And I think looking at time form, time figures, they've got him on a similar sort of level to what Appreciate It is at. They've run to, on the clock, a similar standard so far. Metier's done it all on his best on quite deep ground, but it was
quite testing ground, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has. Although the times again suggested that at Ascot it wasn't too bad. So, and he's a flatbred, isn't he? He's Bymaster Craftsman. I think he'll be all right. And we're probably going to see him, I think, in a Betfair Hurdle, aren't we? So that'll tell us more. But I definitely have him high enough up the list.
Do you think there's any chance that Ballyadam can turn the tables?
I do, yeah. I do. If I was going to have a bet on the Supreme right now, it'd be Ballyadam each way. He's 6-7 to 1, I think. You look further down the list, there's a lot of horses that are probably not going to turn up. Ballyadam's obviously been put in his place by Appreciate It a couple of times now, but I quite like the way that he travelled into it for a long way at the weekend, and then he just didn't finish off. But I'm not convinced that Gordon Elliott's horses are right at the peak of their form at the minute compared to where they will be in 5 or 6 weeks come the Cheltenham Festival. And I think you might see a better performance from Ballyadam. I also think that given that he seems naturally a little bit faster horse than what Appreciate It is, if the ground was a little bit quicker than, say, at the weekend, then that would help Ballyadam. So it's a price-related thing. Ballyadam each way would be the way that I'd lean at the moment.
He certainly looked for a stride or two that he was going to serve it up to him, and she said it's much more appealing at sort of the 7-4 stroke 7-8 to 1. So yeah, that would be your selection. I'd go with Metier actually, purely on the fact I just think there's no value at all with Appreciate It at 7-4. What about the Ballymore? Because Gaillard du Mesnil was obviously another Mullins impressive weekend winner.
He was. I think I'd be with him, Gaillard du Mesnil. He was a useful horse in bumpers in France, including when he won on good ground. So his form since he came to Ireland has been on a more testing surface. But I actually look at this fella and I think that, yes, he's obviously very good on quite testing ground, but I think he'll be better on a sounder surface, actually. He seems to have quite a good action. He's got that good ground form in France. He's obviously an exuberant horse. They had the hood on for the first time at the weekend. And you go through his form. I know he was beaten on his Irish debut, but that wouldn't worry me massively. A reappearance run at a point of the season where Willie Mullins wouldn't have necessarily everything bang on. And since then, he's done everything right. He won very easily on his next start, beating a couple of horses that won on their subsequent outing. And then he's won the graded race at the weekend over this sort of trip. So he's a very strong traveller. He's versatile as regards ground. He's already high class. And I think he's got all the attributes to be able to go and win a Ballymore.
Okay, what about the chances of something like Bob Ollinger? Has he impressed you so far? I quite like him.
Yeah, I like him too. Couldn't say that you've not been impressed by him. He's only been beaten the once so far in a 4-race career, including a win in Grade 1 company last time out, where he beat Blue Lord. Blue Lord's an interesting horse for the festival. I think he might be an improver when he gets onto better ground. Whether he gets better ground at this year's festival, as I've mentioned a couple of times already, I don't know. But I think he could be an interesting one, possibly in a Supreme. But looking at his handicap mark, maybe they'll go down that route. So Bob Bollinger beat a pretty good horse there, and he was comfortably the best of them on the day, wasn't he? And he saw his race out well. But I think he's going to need to improve on that to get to the level that the likes of Gaillard du Mesnil and Brave Man's Game are at.
I mean, he's still very unexposed, isn't he? It's there's plenty of guesswork involved, but yeah, I quite like what I've seen. I think he looks a huge talent. Brave Man's Game, just briefly talk about him, because that's obviously our main English challenger. He's won his last 3. He hasn't ran since the end of December, and he's probably unlikely to now. How taken have you been by his winning performances?
Yeah, really impressed by him. I loved him when I saw him at Newbury, not in the Challow, but the run before. I was there that day and saw him win, and just as a type, I loved him, and I loved the way that he went about his job there. And immediately afterwards, I think I was working with Nick Luck that day, and we kind of said, it looks like he'll head straight to the Challow with a very good chance. He went there and he won it, so he's done that part of the bargain. And it's now on to Cheltenham, you would think, because you say probably straight there. He's a very talented horse, and I can't really knock him in any way, but my suspicion is that there's just more depth to the races in Ireland than the ones in England. And for that reason, I'd rather be with the Irish form going into the meeting, I think, in these novice hurdles in the main. And Gaillard du Mesnil, I think, would just be preferred to Brave Man's Game.
Yeah, so to summarise, Willie Mullins is cleaning up at the moment. Every horse that we talk about is dominating the market. I'm going to go against him just because I quite like what I've seen with Bob Bollinger. We'll move on to the Albert Bartlett, because this is very open, isn't it? And you need a certain type of horse to win this race. They need to be tough. They need to stay.
They need to do all of that. Definitely need to be tough and stay. It was a race that for a long time you've got even in recent times, you've had a fair few surprises in it. There's been horses that you just couldn't really envisage winning that have won. If you went back sort of 5 or 6 years to, was it Very Wood that won it? Horses like that. And they were horses that were completely off the radar, and they'd had a bit of racing. It has been won in more recent times by horses that you've maybe thought have had a bit more of a unexposed profile, like some Monkfish, Minella Indo, Kilbrick and Storm, hadn't had a huge amount of racing beforehand. But they weren't all that easy to find. I think the anti-post betting for this is about 8-10 to 1 the field, isn't it? And that is a fair summary of where we're at. I don't think it's that easy to pick between them, really.
We were having a brief chat about this earlier, and you were saying it's one of those races that quite often you end up forming your view quite close to the time, because at the moment it looks very open.
It does, yeah. I mean, you look at the horse that's anti-post favourite is Statler. Well, you'd be surprised if he didn't run. He's going to stay, and he's owned by Ronnie Bartlett, who sponsors the race. So I think you'd be fairly sure. While with some of these novice hurdles, you're kind of looking and you're thinking, well, will that horse run in that race, or will they go for the Ballymore? With him, I'd be fairly sure that's where he's going to line up. But then equally, the horses that are in there and around him in the market, the likes of Fakira and Gentleman's Game, they are also
there's not that
that
much between them. Obviously, they were second, third and fourth, weren't they, behind Gaillard du Mesnil? Different points to take out of all of them, really. I guess Gentleman's Game was the horse that Statler looks like he needs further, doesn't he? You know, he got nabbed on the line for second. Fakira, again, looks like this one needs further because was doing like its best work at the finish. And so it's how you interpret the last, how you interpret the race and how it's going to unfold at Cheltenham. Yeah,
you've ridden in races, I haven't. I know you didn't ride many other hurdles, I doubt, but still.
Or none.
But if you were on a horse, if you were going into the meeting, I think you'd be happier, personally, with, say, I know it could be a real stamina test, and this is on its head if we have rain on Gold Cup morning and it's bad ground, but even over 2 miles, 6 furlongs in a well enough run race, Fakira with headgear on, there's the clue, didn't really travel. He does his best work at the finish, but Cheltenham, although it tests stamina, it also tests speed, less so on the course that the Albert Bartlett is on, I guess. But I do have a worry that he just wouldn't hold his position well enough. I think he is all about stamina, and he'd need the race to be a brutal test. To me, the biggest price of the three that come out of that race at the weekend in the anti-post market is the one that finished ahead of the other two. And I'm sure that he'll improve for going up. Yeah, and I'm sure he'll improve for going up in trips. So, I'd look towards him. Mouse Morris has won the race before as well.
I totally agree. He's very unexposed as well. He's got very little mileage on the clock, and you'd have thought the experience will bring him on.
You would think so. And as you say, he nabbed Statler on the line, didn't he? Over 2 3/4 miles. I would think that he'll probably progress again.
And had they gone a little bit further, well, I know Statler probably needs a bit further. He was tired, wasn't he? The distance between the second and third would have only been bigger.
Yeah, it would. And Fakira is definitely the one that kind of catches your eye late on in the way that he's finishing off. But as I say, he's just one of those horses that I think he might be a touch lazy, and whatever the trip, he's going to lose his pitch a little bit, and he'll need them to be coming back to him. There's a couple of interesting enough runners from the British stables as well that we shouldn't discount. Paul Nicholls has got the likes of 3 under through 5 who won at Musselburgh yesterday. He's got Barbados Bucks who stays really well and is progressing. So they're horses that you can throw into the mix. And an interesting one of Philip Hobbs called Stellar Magic, who's only had 2 starts, both of them at Taunton, a completely different track to what he'd face at Cheltenham. But he's unbeaten in those 2 starts, and he's looked pretty good in doing so. He's bred to stay pretty well. I've no idea if they'll throw him into this race. It'd be a big jump up in trip. They probably won't, but I'd keep an eye on him.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. That's our look at the novice hurdles and a reflection on what happened at the trials at Leopardstown at the weekend. So I'll be back on Thursday, and we'll be looking ahead to some key races of the weekend. And yeah, it's been a pleasure. Chris, thank you very much indeed. And we will endeavour over the course, like I said, of the next 6 weeks to find you some winners.